Have you ever held a toy that didn't just watch you, but knew you? Tonight, you're about to hear true encounters with a doll so malevolent, people swear it can move on its own, whisper in your ears, and drive you to the brink of madness. What you're about to hear isn't a story. These are real events reported by those who lived to tell the tale. This is Bound in Fear, your daily source of true ghost and demon encounters, collected and verified from real people around the May world. Brace yourself, because some toys aren't meant to be played with. Story 1. The Forgotten Toy Shop. I never believed in haunted dolls, in spirits trapped in toys, until the day I found the Labubu doll in the old toy shop on Main Street. The shop had been abandoned for decades, its windows cracked and dusty, the air around it carrying a strange, heavy silence. Everyone in town whispered about the place, how the owner vanished one winter, and how children had disappeared without explanation. I was 17, bored and reckless, and dared by my friends to explore it. I remember stepping inside and feeling like I'd walked into a grave. Dust hung in the sunlight like smoke. The shelves were lined with broken toys, cracked porcelain and faded stuffed animals. And then I saw it, the Labubu doll sitting perfectly on a shelf, as if it had been waiting for me. Its painted eyes were unnervingly lifelike, dark and round, and its smile seemed just slightly wrong. Something inside me screamed to leave, but I reached for it anyway. The moment I held the doll, a cold shiver ran down my spine. The shadows in the room seemed to twist around me, and I heard faint whispering, almost like the walls were speaking. I told myself it was my imagination, but the air grew heavy, oppressive, like the shop itself was watching. I hid the doll in my backpack and left, thinking once I was home it would be harmless. That night I placed it on my desk. The first whispers started softly, barely audible, calling my name in a stretched, rasping voice. I woke several times to find it moved, its head tilted slightly toward me. My heart raced and I began sleeping with a lamp on, but nothing helped. Every shadow in the room felt alive. I started having dreams about the toy shop. I would walk the aisles, the air thick with dust and decay, and every doll stared at me. All of them except the Labubu seemed neutral, but that one was alive. It followed me in the dreams, smiling wider each time I turned my back. I would wake screaming, scratching, at invisible hands across my arms and legs. Friends noticed I had changed. I was withdrawn, pale, almost hollow-eyed. I tried to get rid of the doll, leaving it in a dumpster once, in a park another time. Each morning it was back on my desk, smiling, always smiling, as if it knew I had no escape. I dug into the toy shop's history. The more I read, the colder I felt. Children had disappeared, employees had vanished, and always in passing the Labubu doll was mentioned. Police reports described it as unnervingly lifelike and malevolent, a vessel for something dangerous. One story haunted me. A little boy named Tommy took the doll home in the 1950s. By morning he whispered to it constantly, drool on his chin, and by evening he vanished. The doll was found later in the abandoned toy shop, intact, smiling. That night I tried burning it. I set it in the fireplace, but the flames dimmed unnaturally. The doll fell to the floor unharmed, and laughter filled the room, a high, cruel sound that made my skull ache. Things escalated. Whispers became words. Don't leave me. Footsteps echoed when I was alone. Shadows slithered along walls, refusing to stay still. I woke one night to the doll on my chest, its tiny hands cold against my skin, eyes glowing faintly. It spoke in my voice. "It's time." Panic consumed me. I flung it across the room, only for it to reappear on my desk by morning. Friends stopped calling. I barely ate, barely slept. I realized I had invited something ancient into my life, something patient and cruel. The final night came in a blur. I woke to a presence in my room, thick and suffocating. The doll sat upright, smiling impossibly wide. The walls seemed to breathe, the shadows converging around me. I clawed at the bed, screaming, trying to escape, but it was everywhere. Its tiny hands gripped me, and its eyes burned into mine with a malevolence I can never describe. So I blacked out. I woke hours later on the floor. The doll was gone, the room normal. I thought I was safe. Weeks later, I passed the toy shop, reopened and cheerful. There it sat in the display, pristine, smiling, and when it caught my eyes, it tilted its head. I knew then with absolute certainty it was waiting, always waiting. Story 2. The Night Visitor. I never should have gone back to my grandmother's house. She had lived alone for years in that small town on the outskirts of Kyoto, a house that smelled of incense, old wood, and memories. When she passed, I inherited everything, including a locked cabinet in the corner of the living room. I didn't think much of it at first, just an old piece of furniture collecting dust. That is, until I found the Labubu doll inside. It was small, delicate, almost fragile, with a porcelain face painted pale and smooth, eyes unnervingly round and black, and a smile that made my stomach twist. I remember lifting it out carefully, cradling it in my hands. The moment I did, a chill ran through the room, and the shadows seemed to lean closer, stretching along the walls as if curious. I told myself it was nothing, just a doll, but deep down I knew better. The first night it was in my room, I woke to faint whispers. At first, they were indecipherable, soft words in Japanese, muttered behind me when I turned around. The room was empty. I tried to convince myself it was the wind or the old house settling, but then I noticed small things. My grandmother's old teacup had moved a few inches from the shelf. The incense stick had toppled. I tried to ignore it, setting the doll on my desk. But every time I blinked, I swore its head was tilted, watching me, and that smile, small and innocent in appearance, seemed alive, calculating. Soon, the dreams began. I would be walking through the narrow streets of the town at night, mist curling along the sidewalks, paper lanterns swaying in a wind I couldn't feel. Everywhere I turned, children's faces stared at me, some laughing silently, others crying softly, and always the Labubu doll appeared, following me through alleys, across bridges, standing still yet somehow moving closer each time I blinked. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. Once I woke to find small handprints on my window, tiny scratches across the wood floor, and the doll sitting upright on my bed, facing me. I jumped back, falling to the floor, but when I looked again, it was still smiling, unmoved by my panic. Days passed, and the doll began to communicate more clearly. It would leave tiny notes, written in a childlike scrawl I hadn't seen before, messages I couldn't ignore. Play with me. Don't go. I am here. I tried throwing them away, but the next day, the messages reappeared. Sometimes under my pillow, sometimes on the floor, sometimes clinging to my door like someone had left them there while I slept. I couldn't eat properly, couldn't focus, and the neighbors began to whisper about how strange I had become. Shadows moved in impossible ways around me, stretching across the walls, pooling in corners that should have remained dark. One night, I heard crying outside my bedroom window. Soft, persistent, almost pleading. I lived alone. The streets were empty. Heart hammering, I opened the window slowly. There was nothing there. But then, just as I was closing it, I glimpsed a small face pressed against the glass. Its eyes were black as ink, wide and unblinking, staring directly at me. I slammed the window shut. When I turned around, the doll was on my desk, its head tilted toward me. I could feel its presence pressing into my mind, an unspoken demand, a silent threat. I began to fear it, not just the doll itself, but what it represented. It wasn't just a toy, it was alive, and it knew I could see it. I researched it, desperate to understand. I found records of children who had owned Labubu dolls in towns across Japan, all experiencing strange occurrences, sleepwalking, hallucinations, objects moving on their own, whispers in the dark, sudden disappearances. In one account, a young girl named Aiko had taken the doll to her room, and by morning she had been speaking in a voice that was not hers. She vanished 2 nights later, leaving the doll smiling on her bed. I panicked. I couldn't stay in that house, yet I feared leaving it alone with the doll. I began sleeping with all the lights on, candles burning, chanting prayers I barely remembered from my childhood. Nothing helped. Then came the final night. I woke at exactly 3:33 a.m., as I had every night for the past week, to the sound of soft footsteps pacing across my wooden floor. I froze, barely breathing, listening. The footsteps stopped outside my bedroom door, then a knock, a single, deliberate knock. My heart leapt into my throat. I whispered a prayer under my breath. Another knock. Then silence. I waited hours, shaking. Morning light finally crept into the room, but the feeling of presence didn't leave. I looked around and the doll was on my chest, hands small but ice cold, its painted eyes glinting with a light that was not reflection. And it spoke, not whispering this time, but clearly, "They are here." I didn't know who they were. I didn't care. I felt it pressing into my mind, trying to draw me into some dark place beyond comprehension. I screamed, flinging the doll across the room. It landed upright, unharmed, smiling wider than I had ever seen. I ran from the house, not looking back, not stopping until the town was behind me and the roads twisted into unfamiliar fields. But even now I hear it sometimes in my dreams, in fleeting shadows, in the faintest whisper of wind. I am here. Don't go. Months later, I returned once foolishly to see my grandmother's house. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, even. But on the desk in the exact center of the room sat the Labubu doll. Its eyes met mine, dark, knowing, and its smile stretched impossibly wide. I turned and left, never returning. Even now I sometimes wake in the night, certain I feel the pressure of tiny hands on my chest, and I know that somewhere, somehow, the doll is still waiting, patient and cruel, smiling and watching. Story 3. The Traveler's Curse. I had never believed in cursed objects, but the Labubu doll I found in that small traveling circus changed everything. I was 19, working as a stagehand for a circus that moved between villages in the Brazilian rainforest. The tent smelled of sweat, sawdust, and fire, and performers were always tired, faces painted, bodies worn from long days. One evening, after a particularly grueling performance, I was helping pack equipment when I noticed a small, delicate doll tucked in an old trunk labeled props. Its porcelain face was pale, with eyes black and unnervingly round, and a slight smile that made my chest tighten. I lifted it gently, examining it. Something about it felt wrong, as though it was aware I had found it. Aware I was holding it. That night I placed the doll on my cot. The circus was quiet, the other performers gone to sleep or passed out drunk. I remember the first whispering, almost as soon as I closed my eyes. Low, raspy voices, speaking in a language I didn't recognize, carried through the tent's thin canvas. I rolled over, hoping it was the wind. But then the doll's head tilted. Its eyes seemed to glint, reflecting a light that wasn't there. I shivered, telling myself it was my imagination. By the next morning, strange things had begun. Small equipment went missing. My cot was moved slightly. And always, I could feel eyes watching me, following me wherever I went in the dark corners of the tent. As days passed, the doll's influence grew. Other circus members began noticing things too. A tightrope walker stumbled for no reason. A juggler's knives slipped in mid-air. Performers argued for no apparent cause. The doll was always present, sometimes on the edge of the stage, sometimes sitting on a crate in the center of the tent. And each time someone looked at it, they felt an inexplicable fear, as though it was probing their minds, searching for weakness. I tried to warn the others, but no one believed me. They laughed, called me paranoid, said I was imagining it after long nights under the humid canopy of the rainforest. But then the accidents escalated. One evening, the fire eater nearly dropped, flaming torches onto the crowd. Another night, a trapeze artist fell awkwardly, miraculously surviving but screaming in terror. And always the doll would be somewhere in the shadows, smiling. I began sleeping with it in my cot, trying to understand it, hoping to somehow contain its influence. But each night I would wake sweating, small scratches on my arms or legs, soft whispers in my ears, voices saying, "Give me, give me." Once I woke to find my blankets ripped, tangled in a way that formed a small nest, as though the doll had moved through the night to prepare it. I researched what little I could about the doll, asking elders in villages we passed through. They shivered at the mention of Labubu dolls, warning me not to keep it, telling stories of children who vanished, families cursed, and objects that returned no matter what you did. But the doll had latched onto me. It was patient, waiting until I was tired, vulnerable, alone. One night, I woke to it standing on my chest, tiny porcelain hands pressing down, cold as ice, its smile impossibly wide. I tried to throw it, but it fell to the floor and rolled upright again, and then I heard the first voice that was unmistakably my own whispering back at me, "It's time, don't resist." Panic consumed me. I ran into the forest, hoping to leave it behind, hoping that the dense jungle would swallow it and break whatever hold it had on me. The air was thick, humid, alive with the sounds of insects and distant animals, yet the doll was there, lying at my feet when I stumbled through the undergrowth. Its eyes glinted in the moonlight. I backed away, heart hammering, and it rolled closer on its own, moving unnaturally fast. I screamed, swinging at it, but it dodged impossibly, always smiling, always just out of reach. By morning, I had collapsed near a small river, trembling. The doll was beside me, silent, watching. I could feel its presence in the water, in the rustling leaves, in every shadow. I realized then that it didn't just haunt a place, it followed its chosen host, waiting for weakness, feeding on fear. When I returned to the circus, the other performers were gone. Tents were empty, belongings packed or abandoned. The doll was nowhere in sight, yet I could feel it with me, in my chest, in my mind. Over the next days, strange occurrences continued. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. The wind whispered through the jungle with voices that seemed to mock me, and I began to see fleeting figures at the edge of my vision, small dark shapes laughing, pointing. One evening, while preparing the tent alone, I saw the doll on the stage, upright as if it had never left. Its eyes burned, its smile wide. I tried to smash it, but the porcelain remained intact, unyielding. I realized then there was no destroying it, only appeasing it, and I had no idea how. I fled the circus entirely, moving from village to village, but I could feel it following. It haunted my dreams, appearing in mirrors, reflected in water, sometimes in the faces of strangers who would smile in ways that were just slightly off. I tried hiding it, ignoring it, praying. Nothing worked. And then I understood. It wasn't bound by distance or time. It existed to attach itself to a host, to feed on terror and control, until that host was consumed. I was not the first, and I would not be the last. Years later, I heard about another circus in a nearby region. Performers reported strange occurrences, accidents, and a doll, small, pale, with black eyes and a faint, knowing smile. They called it Labubu. I didn't know whether to warn them or run, but I knew this much. Wherever the doll went, fear followed. And even now, when I close my eyes at night, I feel its tiny hands press against my chest, its gaze burning into mine, and I know with absolute certainty that it is still patient, still smiling, still waiting for the next unfortunate soul who dares to notice it.